Hi, I'm John Volturo, and I'm an out executive coach helping LGBTQ individuals navigate the workplace.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. Before jumping into the show, I want to extend a virtual invitation to our weekly office hours taking place every Friday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. We've opened up our office hours to all LGBTQ business owners looking for support during COVID-19. If you need some extra inspiration, please consider joining our mailing list for the invite. And you can also visit outentrepreneur.com for details on how to get connected to our office hours. So with that, I am super excited to be introducing you all to John Volturo. John, welcome to the show. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to have you here.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know not everyone is familiar with you, so I want to make sure that our audience knows truly how impressive you are. So John is an internationally recognized speaker and coach who focuses on LGBTQ equality in the workplace and the importance of having a diverse leadership team to increase the bottom line. John has served as a C-level executive in many recognizable companies and was responsible for building Tony Robbins' brand and empire. John is married with his husband and he lives in LA with their 2 daughters. So John, there's so much more to your bio, and I have a hunch we're gonna get into some of that in our conversation today. I wanted to allow you to have the opportunity just to kind of open up and maybe fill in some of the blanks of what it is to be an internationally recognized speaker and coach, and specifically how you're using those superpowers, your business superpowers, to work inside organizations to help build up, I guess, the diversity of a leadership team, including LGBT executives.
Well, thank you. You know, it's really interesting because the path to getting to this moment was one, when I look back, of lots of roller coasters. And over the course of my career, you know, I'm from New York City, and I came out, I could actually say I probably was never in. And I like to tell people that I was really naive about whether or not I needed to be in or out, just didn't get it, and started working at a media company. And right away, I was young, I was in my 20s, right away, I heard people, and this is New York City at a media company, by the way, I heard people say things about older gay men that were disparaging. These were out gay men. And it made me, I wasn't in the closet, but I wasn't sharing myself. It made me realize that, you know, I have to be super careful. And when I started realizing that I needed to be super careful about who I am and how I show up at work, I started to develop this kind of like this fear. You know, every day I went into work, I had no idea whether I would be exposed or judged. And kind of like coming from a background where I kind of felt judged growing up, it was not a place that I felt very safe. And I was consistently looking for ways to kind of like figure out how I could create safety. And one of the things I noticed when I was there is that the straight white men who ruled the company all had, you know, similar things in common. They were all of a certain age. You know, at that point I was in my 20s. They probably were 40, no more. They were married. They lived in the suburbs. They had kids. And suddenly that became kind of like a destination for me, you know, to at first just get my MBA. And I thought, well, if I get an MBA, maybe people won't say those things about, you know, the fact that I am gay, and they'll look at the fact that I actually have a really good business pedigree. So as I look at that period of time, I left work and got an MBA, and I thought like that would give me legitimacy in the kind of the straight dominant white world that I was working in. And, you know, here I am, a white person who, you know, I grew up really poor, but I consider myself to be very privileged and very fortunate and blessed. And, you know, I still had those challenges because I was dealing with this environment that on an ongoing basis was discriminating against me. And, you know, and I'll be really honest with you, Rose, I didn't know I was being discriminated against. I just knew I was being treated differently. I wasn't being treated as if I was the same type of executive. I wasn't being invited to the same types of social events after work that my colleagues who were, you know, non-LGBT were. And when I got to California, I realized that a New York boy moving to Los Angeles, with a very New York attitude, I needed a coach. I needed somebody to help me kind of get used to the culture and get used to the workspace and the differences. And, at that point in time, I like I was saying, I really started to pay a lot of attention to what was happening around me. And when I think about something that has differentiated me all my life, even from when I was a little kid, knowing I was different, is that I'm super hyper aware. And this is something probably that's been both a benefit and something that's been not a benefit to me. I'm hyper aware of my surroundings and the people in it, the words they use, how they use them, and kind of their body language. And, so when I did come out to Los Angeles, I came with that, quote unquote skill set. And, I got this coach who basically started telling me, change my appearance, look like your boss, remake yourself in his image. You'll be accepted into the inner circle then. And I did that. And what happened over that period of time when I did that was in 1 month, I lost 30 pounds off of 170 pound body frame, which was, I got really thin. I felt unhealthy. And when I started analyzing what was going on and I was in therapy, I realized I wasn't being authentic with myself and it was hurting me. And although I had been achieving financial success for my company, it just really came at this huge cost to me personally. And this is really when the path for me to say, I'm going to do something different. I just have to figure it out. That was when I realized I needed to figure out a way to achieve success on my own terms without having to alter my DNA and kind of like the beautiful person that I needed to believe I was at that time. And that at that point in time was a pivotal moment because I was really hiring a lot of folks and I paid a lot of attention to who I was hiring, why I was hiring that person, how I was able to develop them, what I wanted to put into developing them, and most importantly, how I included them in the decisions that were really important within the department. And I'll tell you, as a result of that experience, my teams were diverse, inclusive. I was really focused on equitable pay. And this is going back, years. And I had really high retention on my teams. So I kind of felt like I was onto something, but again, I wasn't really conscious of it. And this kind of leads me to where I am today and kind of the path of why I do the type of coaching I do and why I'm sought out for the specific type of coaching and also the speaking engagements is having, been in a place where I experienced a lot of the things that would be growth moments that felt very painful then. But when you look back, boy, was it a growth moment. And knowing that as someone who has risen to, the C-suite and been on boards of companies, global companies, I realize I have an opportunity to help others avoid some of that. And that's really what I speak about. That's how I, inform the coaching that I do. I know the types of things that happen behind closed doors at the C-level with the boards, the types of questions they ask, the type of things they say about people. And that information really helps inform how I show up, but also how I can help people to show up as themselves and achieve what they want to do. And that's why people seek me out as a coach, because I really can give them those types of shortcuts and insights.
Oh my gosh. I've been furiously taking notes because so much of what you're sharing is so powerful. And I think it certainly resonates with me. And I'm sure there's folks listening right now who are like, absolutely. I like how you said you were never in, you were kind of always out, coming from New York. And yet, when you're entering the workplace, when you entered, it's a lot of it is still very similar today for young people who, however they're entering the workforce, whether they're coming from college, a vocational school, right out of high school, it's this kind of like being out for so long and then feeling that pressure, like what you said when you were working with your coach, of this pressure to have to assimilate to the norm, to kind of be like the leaders that you see in order to fit in or have access to, the after work activities that are those kind of networking opportunities that allow you to advance. So I think that certainly resonates for some folks listening. I also like what you said about having to be super hyper aware all the time. And I think that speaks to what we see in the workplace. Like if we want to have inclusive workplaces, we start at this level of building safety and trust. And I think for a lot of LGBT folks, for other underrepresented communities, whether you're folks of color, you have different abilities, you're constantly assessing and auditing an environment, like these kind of the signals, the nonverbals, even the art on the walls, if there is art, what is that communicating to you? And is there anything in that that shows that, the folks that are leading a company are aware that LGBT people exist, that they serve them, that they're taking concerted efforts to serve them and also include them on the team? And okay, just so much stuff. I think the thing that really stood out for me and what you just shared is this piece on when you recognized you needed a coach. Mm-hmm. And some of the advice that coach shared with you that I'm sure now in your own practice, it's probably the exact opposite of what you're encouraging folks to do. And what I think you define so well is what I say every week, keep showing up 100%, being your authentic self, how you define authenticity is achieving success without altering your DNA. I just think that's so powerful. And it sounds like that certainly is influencing how you're coaching LGBT folks in particular to advance in their careers and understanding that language that you very much are this translator of having had a bird's eye view inside of some of these corporate boardrooms, really what that culture is like and kind of how not everyone understands that, and that you're able just to kind of speak truth to kind of the realities of kind of the world that we're in, and and also coaching folks on how they can still be themselves, survive in that environment, and like you said, use that opportunity to maybe change some minds, change some hearts if that's possible, and influencing the workplace in the ways that you can. So I just want to say that was awesome, and thank you, and just so powerful right out of the gate. One thing that I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit more is the gap between you working, for other folks, and then your origin story of being your own boss. And one of the things that kind of like when I was reading your bio, just kind of like one of the key architects in building Tony Robbins, coaching empire in and of itself, was that where you were before kind of jumping into your own coaching practice? Or, walk us through that origin story of becoming an outboss, an LGBT entrepreneur.
It's a fascinating kind of part of my life. And, you're right. You're right. You kind of hit it right on. When I moved out to Los Angeles, it was to manage his business. And I didn't work directly for him, but I worked for the company that produced all of his materials and created those 30-minute commercials that you saw. Mm-hmm. So if you were looking at those commercials throughout the 2000s, that's the work that my team did, and I did. And we built out product for him, and I even have a plastic wrap version of one still sitting here that sold to 40 million people across the globe. And one of the things that Tony Robbins did that I thought was amazing was that he took all of this incredible material and he synthesized it in ways that were incredibly accessible. And while you may or may not like the delivery of how he gets to his point, what he was really amazing at, and what he still is amazing at, is really looking at what people are blocked by and helping them to get around it. And that was really appealing to me because that was basically my life. I grew up feeling like there were lots of obstacles, and I wasn't the type of kid that, I don't know where this came from. I just think I needed to survive growing up in Brooklyn. I just walked around the obstacles, whether I was getting beaten up or whatever it was. And that appealed to me when I started working with him. And it made me realize that you can do what you want and show up in a really powerful, energetic way and achieve goals. And everyone has different goals. You might want to be a leader. You might not want to be a leader, but I'll say, I think everybody's a leader. Whether you're leading your home, you're leading yourself, leading an organization, all the tools that he has and the ones that I've taken as a result of working with him and also, becoming a coach myself and getting educated. Part of the origin of the type of coaching that I do comes from him because he moves people from one state to a next. That is his big thing. And I love that. I love the idea of harnessing the energy that you have within yourself to overcome the obstacles. A lot of people will say things like, oh, I'm really passionate about that. The way I interpret that is that you have a lot of energy around that, and it's positive energy, and you want to work on that, and you want to do that, and you're going to put lots and lots of your goodness into making it happen. How do we make it as focused as possible? So when I was thinking of becoming a coach, there are all these coaching schools out there. it was a pivotal moment. And like, I'll backtrack for 1 second. I had been working as a global CMO at a company that was in a lot of different spaces: healthcare, wellness, beauty, fitness, peak performance. And we had lots of products, 40,000 doors across the world, and brands that you would see on TV. It was, as you can imagine, a very demanding job. And at that point, people kept coming to me to ask me to coach them. And when I was coaching them, I was using this energy tactic that I learned back when I worked with Tony Robbins. So when I decided to leave that job, which I did because I didn't feel like I was spending enough time with my kids, and because I felt like it's really hard when you have this drive and this passion to kind of be your own boss. And this is not the first time I've been an entrepreneur. I actually started a company back in 2014 that was a fan and brand kind of storytelling app. So
cool.
Fast forward, like, I'm tapping back into that energy when I was at that job, and I wanted to be closer to my kids. I was traveling too much. And I realized I'm going to go back to school to become a coach, because somebody said to me, when you're trying to figure out the next thing to do in your career, pay attention to what people ask you for the most. What people always asked me for the most, Rhodes, was for my advice, my counsel, my mentoring, my coaching. Mm-hmm. So I found a program that enabled me to be the coach I wanted to be, but also applied this energy practice. So as a result, I became, through that coaching, what they call an energy leadership master practitioner. And that's just a fancy way of saying that I'm able to find, working with you, the energy inside you to transform the behaviors you have and create new habits so you can reach the goals that you have, no matter what they are, whether it's work, home, or in between. And so for me, like you said, and you hit it right on the head, the origin of my coaching journey started when I was working with Tony Robbins. It took about a good 7 years to get there, but I needed those 7 years because I needed to have the experiences that informed who I am today, who make me those experiences that make me the really empathetic person, kind of like with the superpower of being able to see what's happening without anyone even kind of acting first. And, taking that kind of like that thing that challenged me the most, that energetically drained me the most, and turning it into a power was, quite frankly, really powerful for me as a coach.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. And, I follow Tony Robbins, and I agree with you. His body of work, truly being able to synthesize a lot of folks who have been using similar tactics, in the past, like Jim Rohn is one of his big mentors, and translating it in a way that just, resonates for many, many, many people. And at the same time, I think of my partner, I took her to an event one time, and like what you said on delivery, she was like, "I'm sorry, he just doesn't speak to me," and I was like, I totally get it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I'm, in terms of delivery where I'm like, okay, I get that this isn't necessarily geared towards, a bisexual trans guy, but it's still helpful. And I think what's so powerful in what you're doing is that you too are able to use this kind of coaching technique using energy. And you have this lens of being a part of the LGBT community where you can take all of that good stuff that he does put out there and translate it in a way to communities that can really, really benefit from it, like you said, and kind of moving through blocks. And I think so much in our communities is the negative messaging that not so much now, although it's, certainly on social media, but, less so in kind of mainstream films and things like that, but just some of the negative messaging that is kind of a part of our subconscious. And if we're not careful in this kind of philosophy of deconstructing it all, we can internalize it. And I think working with a coach like you in the context of the workplace, of how do we navigate this workplace that wasn't necessarily built for us, yet we have so much to give. And if we're in an environment where we can be ourselves, we can do really good work. And I think what you're able to do is, use all of that good stuff that Tony has been able to synthesize for a lot of folks, and synthesize it even more in your delivery for, LGBT folks and obviously other people that just resonate with what you're doing. And as like a Reiki kind of practitioner, I love it. I love kind of this idea of using energy to transform, these kind of traditional institutions, including the workplace, and for the better, especially in this moment that we're in. And I want to kind of, jump into how how you as a coach, as an entrepreneur, are using your superpowers, like using your skills and wisdom to navigate where we are right now. So I guess it's like a two-part question in terms of how you're surviving and thriving, in your life and in your business during COVID-19. And then kind of secondly, is kind of like how you're able to show up for those folks that you coach and allaying some of their concerns with the world that we're in right now and what looks like to be a very changed world at the end of at least containing COVID.
Right. It's a good point. And while you were talking about that, I was just thinking about how I have these buckets of my life, right? There's my coaching business, there's my home life, there's my other pieces of business. And one of the things I've been working on, and actually I do every month, are these gay men's coaching circles. And they're filled with, men who are in the workplace. There are different groups. So there are some that are filled with CEOs, some that are filled with VPs, some that are director level managers, people who really, who are gay men, and who are looking for a focus. They're looking for leadership presence. They're looking for an edge, right? Because our, non-LGBT peers have built-in edges in many ways. And it was interesting, and you brought this up, when I was scheduling these meetings and I was setting them up, I was really paying attention to the language that I used to market them. And I went from gay men's coaching circles to coaching circles for professional gay men. And then in the description, men who happen to be gay to gay men. And I was kind of going back and forth with it because I was wondering, like, how relevant would it actually be to have a coaching circle focused just solely to help gay men achieve their goals? And boy, was I surprised at how relevant it was. Because here, and I think, a lot of people who live in like the bubbles of the big cities where they seem incredibly liberal, we might live in pockets of neighborhoods that are liberal, but once you go through that office, depending on the type of industry you're in or the type of company you work at, all rules are kind of like thrown out the door. And, leadership comes from the top. And if that person who's at the top is not the most open person, you're going to need, these folks are going to need help. And so these groups that started pre-COVID were really focused on how do I, as a CEO, create a culture that feels diverse, inclusive, and equitable? What are the things I need to do? How do I show up as a leader? Wow. So when COVID came, what did we talk about? We started talking about resiliency. How do we survive? And how do we, and as I'm doing right now a lot of, and you asked a really great question, a lot of the coaching that I've done pre-COVID was not about surviving, reconstructing, rebuilding, and then thriving. It was all about how do I take this great time that we're in right now and make it even better. Now the world is upside down for most people. I would say almost for everybody, because even if you have a job today, like you said, the technology that we use is going to be different. The way we show up, the way we network with each other, it impacts the way we family. Everything's so different. So pre-COVID to now, the way the coaching has changed a lot is that it's become a lot more focused on resilience right now. So I would say month one has been, how do we just survive all of the changes? We've never in our history, and this really does impact LGBTQ people more than the non-LGBTQ person, perhaps, because we don't have the same types of workplace protections. Workplace protections aren't even being paid attention to in this country right now. People are saying put aside diversity, equity, and inclusion. Surprisingly, and 22 million people or more applied for unemployment. And I'm sure a big portion of those folks are LGBTQs. So, where the coaching is going right now is how do we rebuild? How do we connect? How do we reconstruct our world, knowing that the way we communicate, the way we show up in places is going to be different, yet we still have to support our families. We still have to grow as individuals, and we still want to have human interaction. And, Zoom, just as great as it is, it's not enough for people. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is helping to build bridges. I think of it as, a bridge from the pre-COVID world to living and sheltering in place world right now to the bridge from here to the next place, which is probably a hybrid of being out in the world and also somewhat being sheltered. And, whatever normal looks like a year from now, my feeling is that we're going to have versions of this much more frequently. And how do we adapt to that? And I'm also the president of the International Coaching Federation Los Angeles chapter. So I'm really blessed to have access to like 450 local coaches, 2,000 more outside of that. And over the past couple of months, I've been doing resiliency workshops with some of my colleagues, and they've been really powerful. We focus on, and if I were to share this with your audience, I would say the thing that people are asking me the most right now during COVID is, how do I survive it? I'm telling them this, Rhodes. I'm telling them, create a chart. So everybody who's listening to this, imagine you have a piece of paper in front of you. Make 3 columns. The column on the left, at the top of it, write, what I cannot control, ... The middle column should say something like, what I can influence, ... And the right column could say something like, I can control, ... And in those columns, write down all the things you can't control, you can influence, and you can control. In order for a lot of us to move past this time, we really need to focus on the things we can control. We really need to focus on the things that we can influence. We can't worry about the things that we can't control, because we can't control them. So we can put tons of energy into that, but it's going to psychically drain you. It's going to exhaust you, and you might not be able to show up to do the self-care you need right now for yourself, for your family, for your work. So a lot of what we're doing right now is really very focused work on that. How do we get beyond resilience? How do we retain, a level of social connectedness? And really importantly is, like, how do we build that bridge where we're being proactive? Because people want to do something, but we're in such a fear mode. Like, the shock is still happening. We're still in grief. And now we're hearing bubbles about the economy opening, but we don't know what is happening in our state. And the governors are working together, and the president's saying something different. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. And, we're trying to seek some sense of normalcy. And I think the thing that I help people focus on right now, during these coaching circles, which are really powerful, but also in the individual coaching, is, what can we control, and how can we really focus on the positive things we control so that we get more of that, so we feel a sense of agency again. So we feel that we have some sort of power and control over our lives.
I love everything you just said. And, I was trying to recall a quote that I just read from Brene Brown, who I feel like every day I'm looking at something that she's saying. I love her too. Maybe we'll get her as an ally on the show at some point. But she had said something that I'm sure you've heard and our listeners have, where, normalcy, right? Like, normal wasn't really working for us, and so in this moment, everything, like what you just described, between the chaos, between like leaders, like at least elected leaders, totally on different pages. So it's like, what are we to do in this moment? And I think what you're doing, we're just this exercise of like, let go of what you absolutely cannot control, understand what you can influence, and know what you have total control over, and it's like, even if it's like sleeping well, eating well, staying connected with a pet, a loved one, a friend, something that's within your reach. And I love that middle column. What are the things that you have the ability to influence? And I think sometimes we might paint ourselves in a corner where we're not seeing like the full picture of all the things that we have influence over. And such a great example of what you shared is just in your own coaching practice, saying, you know what, I think that there's something that I can do as a leader in the coaching space for gay men, and opening up the circle where you're able to create the space and to have these connections, especially in this moment right now where we are socially distanced, but not virtually distanced. And you're thinking outside of the box and showing up and adding even more value than probably pre-COVID, right? And so like, where does that take you? Where does that take your practice? How do you empower more gay men, in the workplace and beyond? And you're doing that work. And, I know for myself, it's kind of still showing up to do the work. Every Monday I'm offering these community calls for diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders, and those folks that really care about the work and want to keep their commitments to inclusion at the center of all workplace responses to COVID. And it's so powerful where, it would be silly for me to lead a webinar of like how to manage a crisis in this moment. Like, we have not lived through this moment. So it's really powerful to just create space for folks to come together, workshop ideas, workshop what's working well, unpack those responses that have been less than inclusive, and really dreaming up how to do this work into the future, beyond this moment. And I think that's really, people are craving that. I mean, even on a small level, you can influence your family or your friends. You could, if you have access to technology and Zoom, kind of creating these kind of small community calls and just checking in on folks, sending snail mail. I mean, there's so many things that we do have influence and we do have control over. And I agree with you, like, focus attention there. And, it may help you sleep better at night, I would say. And it's tempting because it does feel very chaotic too. And it's easy to kind of go in that direction of, as you said, just kind of the fear machine. So how do we resist it? And I think, you and I are trying to be creative around that. And I have no doubt that most of the folks listening are adding even more value in their own businesses and really, truly thinking outside of the box. I wanted to ask you, I feel like we've been dancing around superpowers this whole conversation. I have a hunch you have a lot of thoughts on this. So I wanted to give you the opportunity, just in thinking about where you've been as a professional, as an employee working for other folks, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a leader in your community, being a part of our rainbow family. What from those lived experiences do you see as superpowers that allows you to stand out in the work that you do every day?
Mm-hmm. I've thought about this question, and, I listened to your podcast and I love it. And I've listened to other people's answers. And, for me, I'll tell you, Rose, there's something I always say to people, and I think this actually might be my podcast. Earlier, I had mentioned the idea that I pay attention to, I'm almost like hyper vigilant about seeing things that maybe other people don't see. But the next step in that process is that the world, I almost visualize the world as puzzle pieces that come together. And I think my superpower really is that I know how to bring people and things together that make meaning for people, and touch them in ways that move them towards things that are important to them. And I would have to say that is probably my biggest superpower, because when I feel people really warming up to ideas and thoughts and meaning and starting to take action, it's often around that type of interaction we have with each other, like making sense of things. And so maybe that's my superpower that I should be creating a cloak for, because I do think it's been something that, like based upon our conversation today and things that I've been talking about, I just look at the world as a bunch of puzzle pieces that need to be put together. And what's really cool about this puzzle in my head is that the pieces are really fluid. And as the time changes, we can move them around and make another really beautiful picture. And we keep modifying it as time goes. And I don't know that there are a lot of folks like that out there. And it's probably a combination of the fact that I have the life that I lived, also dyslexic, so things don't come as easy for me. I have to kind of like think about it really hard. And, when I'm trying to simplify things, I kind of think of things of how they go together.
I really appreciate that. And I'm thinking about what you're saying, on that first piece, kind of going back to what you said about being very hyper aware. And I almost thought like, oh, it's a superpower. It's like X-ray vision, right? Like you're able, and it might be because, it sounds like you have that ability to sense energy, right? I mean, that's a part of your coaching. And so that combined with this kind of like system thinking, like zooming out like at like the 50,000 foot level, and you can kind of see, an experience over here connects with an experience over there, whereas some people are a little closer to kind of their reality. And I wonder, like with both of those, I mean, definitely with the first one, but on that system thinking, kind of putting the puzzle pieces together, if it's because like there, like the concept of code switching, where if you're a member of an underrepresented group, you're often like translating, like if you're in the company of folks that who are cisgender and straight, right? Like in the business setting, say it's a bunch of guys, like there's a way that sometimes you have to translate your experiences of being within the rainbow family to then be like, oh wait, I have to like, they're not going to understand this cultural reference or something like that. So you have to kind of talk around it. And I wonder, like, if that just enhances like a superpower that you naturally have, also from being dyslexic too. Of like working harder and having to describe things in a way that not everyone has to, because they have that privilege of being a part of a dominant group, whatever that means, right? In context. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I was like, oh, there's something really powerful to what you just said, and it's fun to explore.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. I don't think I've ever put it in the words as articulately as you just did. But I do feel like you're right. Like that just kind of sat with me really well. I guess I would say to that, whereas, part of the LGBTQ community constantly putting up a translation table. And I think you're right. I think part of what I look at when I'm seeing the world is how I see it and how others see it, how they feel it, what energy they're bringing toward it, and trying to make sense of all of that all the time. And I do think also, as somebody who's worked in marketing for so long and is a storyteller, creating content that moves people, I think that also kind of makes a lot of sense for me, because, these are the things that I spent a lot of time trying to hone on in my skills. And yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you saying that, because it's something that I hadn't put exact words to, but makes total sense.
I see your podcast. I see like some kind of like cover art with like puzzle pieces coming together. I don't know. There's something really, I will listen to it if you create it. So do it, put it out in the world. This is awesome. I really appreciate you being on the show and coming just to share what you know and sharing what you do best.
Thank you.
With the time that we have left, I have a few questions for you still. And the first one is, in thinking about this younger generation of LGBTQ folks, younger people who are part of the rainbow family that have totally new ways of describing, like even more sophisticated ways of describing their sexual orientation or their gender identities. As they're kind of like, if you think of your younger self first, let me like back up a little bit. And, when you were very out in New York and you're stepping into the workplace, and all of a sudden you're just like, oh my gosh, okay, I have to be careful about what I say and who I say it to. Okay, so with all of that in mind, thinking about this younger generation, what advice would you have for them just to consider taking an entrepreneurial leap or a step and taking an idea that they have and testing it out? And in this environment right now, especially, like, is there room for caution, or is this an opportunity that you see as one that is just ripe with possibilities?
I will start off by saying, boy, what a good question that is. This is a time ripe with possibilities, and who better to help figure those out than this young generation of upcoming LGBTQ leaders. When you look at, and I've worked in technology, I've been in startups for a long time. When you look at the folks who really succeeded, it's the people who have a disruption. It's the people who have a disruptive personality that gets attention. It's the people who are focused and disciplined. And I think the reality of today's time, when I speak to venture capitalists and I work with a lot of startups, the reality is that funding is dried up a little bit at this moment, but it's not gone. And I think the difference right now, and what I would say to the young people in the audience, is when you're thinking about the future, really think about how you're going to be solve problems for the way people will be living, because we're seeing a new way of living happen around us. And there's going to be a big component of technology. There's going to be disruptions in real estate, whether it's commercial or residential, disruption in the healthcare space. There's going to be networking disruptions. So first and foremost, if you have a passion in that area, really dig into it. And be persistent. Make sure you're focusing on solving a problem. That, by the way, Rhodes, never changes. Solve a problem that enough people have that they're going to want to buy it. Buy your product, use your product, love your product, and show up every day to do the thing that you do really well. And while you're doing it, build a really diverse, inclusive, and equitable culture.
Yes. I couldn't say that better. That's awesome. And yes, and I think it's super inspirational to sometimes, I feel like I've read enough about the Great Depression. I have a background in economics. So it's just kind of like, when you look in hindsight where folks, during that era would pull out their money in the stock market and just there was panic. And when you ride that fear machine, you don't have time to like step into, I guess, your frontal lobe of your brain to do that kind of problem solving or see those opportunities. So I think it's a practice of grounding yourself and acknowledging that there's going to be a lot of feelings in this moment that we're in. And a lot of those feelings may be the ones that we like to bury, avert, or just avoid altogether. Recognize them, acknowledge them, and also through that grounding practice, if you have one, then, lift up your head, lift up your head and look around and see, like what you're saying, there's a new way of living, at least temporarily, and maybe a hybrid, like you said, moving forward. And, what might be problems that folks have moving into this new future that create opportunities where you're doing what you do best. You love what you're doing and you're able to help and be of service. And I think that's like the trifecta of magic when it comes to business. So really, really good advice there. So John, I'm sure after this conversation, a lot of folks are inspired. They want to learn more about you. Where's the best place online that we can learn more about your business? And, for those folks who are looking for a really good coach, where they can find you?
Sure. It's Volturo Coaching, and that's spelled V as in Victor, Olturo, coaching, COACHING.com. And you can go there and find different ways to contact me. You could also email me at john@volturocoaching.com.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really, really good conversation. And I'm wondering, is there anything else that you want our listeners to know just to leave this conversation super inspired?
Sure. The times are tough right now. And Rhodes, you brought this up before. Having a self-care practice and planning for your success is going to really help you to retain your optimism and look forward. So if I were to say one thing, every day wake up, drink your cup of coffee or tea, whatever gets you going, think about yourself and how you can feel good that day and look for making a plan for the future. It will happen. It's going to happen and you're going to rock in it.
Yes, I love that. I just had this vision of Louise Hay talking about mirror work. And if folks are interested in that, Google it. But it's just kind of that, when you wake up every day and you're looking for those opportunities, look in the mirror first and just smile at yourself. You made it another day and, we're getting through this together. So I love that. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation, John. So thank you again. And thank you for inspiring all of our Outboss community. So for folks who are interested in learning more about John and his coaching practice, we have all of that information up on our website at outentrepreneur.com. And if you are on the run and not able to Google that or put it into a browser, you can also text Outboss, all one word, to 33777, and we will make sure you get all that good stuff. And be able to learn about our office hours, which are happening every Fridays at 2:30 p.m. Pacific. So thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. It's truly, truly an honor to just be able to connect with Outbosses and inspire you each week. We'll be back next Tuesday morning. For now, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.